With unemployment still quite high and the outlook for inflation subdued, and in the presence of significant downside risk to the outlook posed by strains in global financial markets, the FOMC has continued to maintain a highly accommodative stance of monetary policy.
I think they'll get to a point, and maybe it's sooner rather than later, where the Fed will simply say to the U.S. Treasury, that's it, you're on your own. Like, we're not doing this anymore. We're not going to go down in history as the institution that totally destroyed the dollar. We've destroyed it 96%. The last 4% will be on your heads. I think that's much more likely to be the outcome. And then the Treasury has to decide, what are we going to cut?
If you look at federal spending, the biggest federal program is Social Security. There's Medicare and Medicaid are probably the next two biggest ones, and then it's probably national defense. Well, if you want to make a meaningful cut in this budget, you need to attack the big ones.
Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, these things are financed on what's called a pay-as-you-go basis, and it's basically, a chain letter you take from the young and you give to the old. And then the young people show up and they say, oh, well, I want mine. I paid in a lot, let me get mine. And I feel entitled. I feel like I paid for this. I deserve to get repaid. That's the insidious part of this. It's very hard to see that you're part of this expropriation system because you did pay something.
The Social Security Act makes clear they can change the terms of that anytime they want to. So, and no one's entitled to anything. Like they sold it as an insurance policy where you're paying in premiums and getting benefits. But every Supreme Court case that has ruled on this and elaborated on it has said it is not an insurance policy. It does not entitle anybody to anything.
So everybody feels entitled to rip off the next generation, but the rip-offs are getting bigger and bigger. So at some point, the next generation doesn't have enough resources, enough earnings, labor income to pay these demands. You come to the end of the chain letter. And that's when this Ponzi scheme that we've been running collapses. We've been running a Ponzi scheme for 6 decades.
On every level of government, we're in debt beyond our ability to pay. And when we come to acknowledge that reality, it's going to be a very frightening awakening for a lot of people. There are a lot of people who believe that they're going to be able to retire on government pensions, whether it's a pension from a government employee or for Social Security. There are people right now who are collecting Social Security or government benefits that think that they're going to be able to collect these benefits for the rest of their lives. They're not. And there are a lot of people right now who are retired 5 years from now. They're going to be back in the workforce. And what that workforce looks like is in large part depending on whether the government does the right thing or the wrong thing.
And I'm sorry that the decisions are so difficult, but that's the way it is, and everybody has to make a tough choice every now and again. And I think in America, on the federal level, they need to identify we have a drastic problem, and the decisions are hard, and we're going to upset some people.
At some point, they're going to have to yank some of it away from somebody. I mean, at some point, some people are going to get stiffed. Absolutely unavoidable.
I can sympathize with this because they paid into a system their whole lives that promised them to pay something out, and now we're saying we're reneging on a promise. We're saying, no, that's not what's going to happen. And that's not fair. But at the same time, it's not fair either to continue indebting your children or their grandchildren to pay this back in the future. So there's a difficult decision that has to be made.
We do need these social insurance programs. We just need to have the generations who are getting this insurance and these benefits to pay for them themselves. We shouldn't be leaving the bill for the next generation. That's not ethical. And it's also not going to work out economically. We're getting to a point where this is going to lead to a collapse of the economy.
The government's going to have to admit that it can't pay 100 cents on the dollar. The government's going to have real reform with entitlements. The government's going to have to tell people on Social Security, people who are currently receiving the benefits, that they're not going to get the benefits they were promised. Some people will get reduced benefits, And some people won't get any benefits at all. And I'm not talking about just cuts to future retirees, but to people who are currently getting checks.
Is it going to be painful? Absolutely. Is it going to be painful anyway? Yes. It can't keep going. It's unsustainable. So sooner or later, these programs have to have some cuts in there. It's only a question of whether we do it sooner rather than later.
The government's going to have to reduce the size of its workforce. The government's going to have to lay off a lot of federal workers. State governments are going to have to lay off their workers. And we're going to have to reduce the salaries of those that we don't lay off to bring public sector compensation back in line with the private sector. These things are going to have to happen. They're going to be difficult choices for politicians to make because it might jeopardize their reelection. But it's what the country needs.
We just don't know what the moment is where the crisis really comes, where push comes to shove and the reality of the situation becomes clear.
Unofficially, we have liabilities to cover Medicare payments into the future, defense expenditures, Medicaid expenditures, Social Security expenditures, and all other government expenditures, foreign aid, whatever you want to think about, the government spending money on lunch for the president out into the future.
You hear numbers anywhere from $50 to $75 trillion to 200 to above. And it really doesn't matter at this scale what the actual number is. Once you're that big, it doesn't matter if you were indebted for $75 or $100 trillion. You still can't pay it back, or there's zero chance that these can be paid back. So the drastic cuts need to be made, and every moment that we delay this, every single year, it gets worse and worse.
What that's telling us is that we are not charging enough for those benefits, that they're not self-supporting.
And if you add up all those expenditures that we have coming due, or we plan to do under pretty optimistic assumptions, and you compare it with all the taxes that we have projected to come in, and you include in the spending servicing the official debt, paying off the official debt. So you have all the bills minus all the taxes, and you form what economists call present value. Well, that number is what we call the difference there in present value between spending and taxes is what we call the fiscal gap. That's about $200 trillion today. The official debt's $9 trillion. The true number we should be looking at is this fiscal gap, which includes the official debt, but has all the other liabilities there and all the other assets, which are tax receipts coming in. That fiscal gap is $200 trillion.
I would agree with them. That's the problem what we have. It's going to get much worse. And the total shortfall, of course, in the budget is huge. And you know, when the conservatives get together and say we have a solution, they give us our budget like we had just recently, they're talking about balancing the budget in 30 years. That's why I don't think they're very serious. The shortfall is huge, and government is too big.
All the administrations, starting really with Eisenhower, they've all been piling up these unofficial liabilities that are now going to haunt this country for decades.
The sooner this albatross is removed from our necks and the sooner we face reality, the sooner we can build on a real foundation, not a foundation of lies and phony promises. And the longer the phony promises go on, the more people's lives will be diverted into expectations of federal payments that aren't coming, so that when they eventually don't come, all the more people will be thrown into turmoil. I think the sooner you can take radical steps, the sooner we can actually return to some level of prosperity. But with this kind of debt overhang and absolutely no prospect of any change from the Republicans or the Democrats, I mean, what better solution is there?